So like I said before, today we're going over periods 8 through 9, and then tomorrow is our big finale. So these are the last 2 units that we'll be going over today. You guys have made it this far, and you guys have been like great students, and we're super excited to teach you guys some more content today. So like I said before, we're just going over periods 8 through 9. We're gonna have a practice quiz like we do after every unit, and then we're also gonna go through like a DBQ and sort of walk you guys through that because we know you guys have been wanting to do that in the chat. So
And an LEQ.
hopefully after this, you'll like understand how to ace the DBQ question.
So we're going to start. Can everyone see the slides? If like people in the comments are struggling, can majority of you see the slides? Okay, I'll take that as a win. Majority is better than none. So great. So let's get all the slides up. So today we're going to start off with period 8. Probably a period everyone's kind of familiar with because probably just learned it. Okay, already see people excited in the chat. So period 8 is basically right where Delilah, oh perfect Patrick, I'm happy for you, is right after where Delilah left off yesterday. We're going to pick right up after the World War II, 1945, all the way to 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan and the Republican Revolution. So this really focuses on a very short time period, and it's kind of a lot jam-packed into a little bit over 30 years, if my math are right. But we're looking at the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Great Society, and all the different societal changes and reactions that come because of that. So let's go start it. So the first big thing we're going to talk about is the Cold War America. Sounds like a very big topic, and there's a lot going on in this slide. We're going to take our time. We're going to break it down. It's not going to look as scary, but there's a lot of things that go into Cold War America. And I think the number one thing you should really remember is that the Cold War is not a physical war, if that makes sense. It's not like the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, where two sides are going at it. They're doing trench warfare or guerrilla warfare. It's not like that. It's the first war that we're seeing that's kind of different, and we're labeling that a proxy war. So if you really want to make you know what you're talking about, call it a proxy war. Your essays and your SAQs, all of that. So the first big thing we really need to look at and really understand is the Truman Doctrine and the idea of containment. So this is kind of a big thing with the Cold War and really understanding what containment means in the context of the Cold War. So my slides are all, there's a lot of glitches on my head. We're good. So the legislation that's really a part of the Cold War, once again, is that have to do with the containment policy and the idea of containment are the Truman Plan, the Eisenhower Doctrine, the idea of the establishment of NATO, and the attempt to contain communism prior to 1960. Those are all before 1960. So we're not even past the 15-year mark of this period starting, and there's already a lot happening. So I'm going to break each one down. Don't worry. So we're going to start off strong with Truman. So the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is a policy implemented to contain communism. It's called a containment policy. If you get an SAQ on or anything like that, just know it has to do with containment. Also, I know there's comments about the green button and finding the slides and all that stuff. There's a nice green button underneath my little presentation called the APUSH CRAM Hub. Click that. And you can also get the notes and all that stuff there too. Back to Truman. So his idea was that the best way to combat communism is to contain it, because that's basically what the Cold War was about. It's an ideological war. It's, once again, not a physical war. It's a proxy war. It's all about the difference between American ideologies, the idea of democracy and all that America stands for, and communism, which nobody really likes because of everything that has to do with it. But so it's communist Stalin and the Soviet Union, in addition, and fighting against, we just started Mika, you're good, and fighting against democratic United States. So when Truman created his doctrine, he wanted to implement the idea of containment. Within this, he wanted to basically help any country that is having problems or communism is rising within and contain it. So once again, it sounds like I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again, but I really can't emphasize it anymore. So the main things that spurred this and caused this was a communist-led uprising against the government in Greece. In addition to that, we see another communist issue in Turkey. So when Soviet demands for more control of the water around Turkey, America realizes that they're trying to expand more of their communist regime and their control. So Truman creates the doctrine to basically say that anytime that America sees communists starting in another country and there's an uprising or even a little inkling of communism, they then have the right and the resources to contain communism. So remember, Truman Doctrine, containment. Yes, exactly, Patrick. It is to contain the spread of communism around the world. If you need to talk about any time of Cold War and how America or presidents affected the Cold War and what they were doing, using Truman Doctrine and additionally the Eisenhower Doctrine is a great idea because they're trying to contain the spread of communism and therefore lessen the power of the Soviet Union. So we have the Eisenhower Doctrine, yet another doctrine, which was announced by Eisenhower when he takes office after Truman. And let's get into that, Allison. I got you. They sound very similar because they're both like, oh, let's contain communism. But Eisenhower's doctrine is focused completely in the Middle East. Instead of providing military assistance or economic assistance kind of in the Western European areas or even in like globally, Eisenhower specifically says that they will provide military and economic assistance to countries within the Middle East. The doctrine stated that the United States will provide aid and, if necessary, military intervention in, once again, any Middle Eastern country threatened by communism or armed aggression from another country. So, in addition to that, we also have the Marshall Plan on the bottom. So that's kind of important too, where we see that Truman wants to, after World War II, both America and the Soviet Union emerged as the most powerful countries in the world, which created, once again, this tension that built up the Cold War. But all the other Western European countries are kind of not doing well, especially France, England. So the Marshall Plan was designed to help economically have European recover. Truman wanted to present $17 billion to the European Recovery Program. Zoe, basically, if I had to simplify it for enough for your AP exam, I bet we can find 3,000 differences. Mainly, it is because of where they are. That's as simple as I think you need. If they're gonna, throw it at you, you can use both of them for the same ideology. Wow. No problem, sorry. Yes, the Marshall Plan is really cool. Honestly, it's Truman trying to help out some people, if we're going to really get down to the simple of it. Truman wants to help Europe recover, and essentially, because of that, he wants to donate billions of dollars to the recovery. I'm using donate loosely. Congress approves of $12 billion, and this is used for the establishment of Western European recovery in World War II. So the last thing we can really look at in terms of containing in this beginning of this ideological difference between the two are the Berlin Airlift, the establishment of NATO, and like these little things that the two countries were doing in this little war. Not this little, this big war. But Berlin Airlift. This one, if you've taken any AP Euro or AP Calc, AP World class, it's definitely come up. After World War II, Germany was broken up into a bunch of different parts, mainly controlled by different allies. And within those parts, because the Soviet Union was one of those, I know they're so related, Arshwan, AP Calc and AP World History. But basically, as I was trying to say, the Soviet Union is one of those allies powers. Therefore, they got a chunk of Berlin. America got a chunk of Berlin. England got a chunk of Berlin. And France got a chunk of Berlin. Now, Stalin started to cut off his chunk of Berlin and try to influence it with his communistic ideals. And the other countries had very similar ideals during this time. They were kind of all working together. And America realized, and Truman realized, that he was cutting off their supply chain. So they were cut off all access by land, and therefore America could not send any sort of aid or goods. So Truman had them airlifted and airdropped, and Stalin did not challenge this, but there was two different Germanys that were really created based off those ideologies. So after World War II, Germany was once again divided because of the Cold War, one part being the democratic American side and one part being the communist side, which we're really going to see throughout several different countries during this war. One of the last things, we have NATO. So for the sake of this exam, you do not need to know the history and the intricacies of NATO. But what you do need to know is that when it was established in 1949, it was a military alliance of Western countries created to counter the military threat from the Soviet Union and its allies. So, NATO is just a coalition of countries coming together saying that if the Soviet Union acts up, they have a military alliance to then squash the threat. It was intended to create a collective defense against the Soviet Union, and the USSR countered this with the Warsaw Pact. But for your sake, please just know it is a military alliance against the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. So, additionally, another thing we're going to kind of see, the US starts amping up its security. So the Cold War is really, once again, kind of a war of pride, if we're going to bow to it. They want it to be the best country. These are two countries fighting to be number one. They want to have the most weapons. They want it to be the smartest. They want it to have the best people. So by doing this, they were having a weapons and arms race. They were in a race to the moon and to gain solar power. As you see, America won the race to the moon, but Russia was in the space first. Yes. So it's basically not only just physical wars, but it's also this idea of who's the best. Thank you, Patrick. The space race. That's what it's called. But they had an intense competition to develop better weapons. We see them both developing more atomic bombs and basically submitting their people to the fear that they could be bombed at any moment. So this is kind of Cold War America. I want to say, just because there's so much on the slide, if you have any questions, I would throw them in now, because we're really going to move on. And when we move on, it's going to start changing away from it. Yes, civil rights is tonight. So is there any other questions on this while we're here? I would throw them in the chat. Annalise, not in the way that you would expect, but more so by dividing. They did, but for your sake, you need to know that in this way, it was more so that they really divided the countries more. I'm going to let Emmy take over more, but I just don't want to overwhelm Emmy and Lubov by going on 20 different things. The Berlin Wall was before. Actually, after. I'm sorry. Wow, my history is off on that one. The Warsaw Pact was between a coalition of Soviet-associated countries. For once again, this is not really what you need to know. If you were taking AP Euro, it was definitely more important, but it was definitely a lot of different Eastern European countries and ideologies like this. Actually, it is important to know that kind of goes in once again to this division that the USSR is separating itself. And we're going to see that and how it's trying to dominate a lot of the Eastern countries and emerge as a power that way. And we're going to start on SALT. Don't you worry when I get there. So, after Cold War America and establishing the basis that America wants to contain communism and stop the spread, and therefore the power of the Soviet Union, we're going to look at different ways that they implemented the policy of containment. So this is all the different like little wars that you're going to see. Ooh, I forgot that. All the different little wars that you're going to see that like are very confusing if you don't understand where they come from. So, China. China is kind of where everything starts. And when I took this test, I was so confused about how all of them connected. But so in China, we see an uprising of or a battle between nationalists in the south and communists in the north to create the Chinese Civil War. Now, the nationalists in the south had a lot of advantages. They had American political and economic backing, but they also were being recognized by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was kind of working with them, a lot of them, and a lot of corruption was spread throughout the nationalist leaders, and inflation soon occurred and devastated the middle class. Meanwhile, the communists in the north held tight discipline and were implementing a lot of communistic ideals and patriotic appeals to really hold a very strong influence over their peasant class. Therefore, they were a lot more put together than the corrupt and overall breaking. No, the Soviet Union supported the communists. We're going to get to that in a second. The way this really worked, I know this looks really confusing, but America supported the nationalists. But the nationalists, a lot of them were really working with the Soviets, which really broke down their side of the war and really helped the Soviets kind of take advantage of this. So by 1947, the nationalist army was in retreat. Truman even tried to help them and ruled out a large-scale invasion to save the nationalists. Even Congress voted to give $400 million in aid to the nationalist government. But 84% of that ended up in the hands of the communists. And by the end of 1949, all mainland China was controlled by the communists. The communists that officially drove out the nationalists, who then fled to Taiwan. From there, the nationalists claimed to be a legitimate government. But what for you really to know is that Stalin came in, made an agreement with the communists, and then established China as an official communist country within the Soviet sphere of influence. So, after the kind of loss and the L that America took in China, they had to face another big problem in Korea. So, the North Korean army invaded South Korea, and the US got involved. Now, the North Korean army is supported by not only, you can say, the Soviet Union, but by China. We're looking at a lot of communistic support in the North Korean army. Meanwhile, South Korea was kind of against communism. Therefore, America was supporting them. The big guy here is General MacArthur. He was sent by Truman to handle this war and to kind of squash the issue. But he aggravated the war by crossing over the North Korean lines against orders and therefore really pushed the South Korean and therefore the Americans back in this war. Being continued to the war in the U.S. not to invade North Korea, the CIA would invade anyway, which is kind of like on brand for the CIA, doing what everyone says not to. But Truman and his advisors believed that the Soviet Union would kind of hold back China. I mean, it's just someone who's like working together, and they thought that the Soviet Union would kind of tell China to chill a little bit, but they didn't. And America and MacArthur thought the same when he crossed over, that China would kind of be restricted by the Soviets. And the US really got involved in the Korean War because, once again, it's this idea of containing communism. They wanted to get involved in any way, and any time that communism is spreading, they're like, we need to get involved and we need to contain it. There's no better person in their minds to contain communism for themselves. Communism is a threat to all democracy, especially American democracy. Therefore, we should contain it. Yes, Sophie. When you see communism, you charge. Literally, if you literally look, anytime America saw communism, they were going for it. They were going to take care of it, even if it wasn't successful or the best idea. But think about that. Every time America gets involved or supports a side, think of the nationalists or the South Koreans in this case, they are supporting democracy or anti-communism. When the Soviet Union gets involved, there's usually some communists involved on that side. Remember, it's the difference in ideology. This would be more so the Truman Doctrine. Eisenhower is not president yet. So we're looking, and after they crossed the 38th parallel and Truman realized this was not going to work, he decided to give up on his attempt to unify Korea and told MacArthur to come back home. MacArthur was not about that. He was going to take the W, but he didn't. He had to come back home. He was met by huge crowds to welcome him over the victory, or his almost victory, over the communist. But Korea was kind of known as being a stalemate. No one really won the Korean War. It was kind of one of those wars where everyone just realized that we were putting, we are putting a lot of effort. Kevin, I promise we're going to get there. We're putting a lot of effort and money into something that is really not going to benefit anyone, and it really didn't. So Eisenhower ran his campaign, a lot of it on going to Korea and trying to fix this problem and what can be done to stop this war, because it kind of continued into his presidency. And he used UN forces. He tried diplomacy, the threat of nuclear war. But overall, the sudden death of Joseph Stalin and the idea that this could escalate even further in March 1953 basically made China stop out of and move out of North Korea, making an armistice. Basically meaning that the death of Stalin in 1953 led to the end of the Korean War, where both China, or North Korea in this case, kind of stepped down and realized once again we are using a lot of resources and this just isn't going anywhere. So an armistice or a peace treaty is signed in 1953 during the first year of Eisenhower's presidency. So the person asking which type of doctrine is this? This all is the Truman Doctrine. Eisenhower just stepped in. He just took care of and kind of ended this war. And we didn't resolve anything. We're very true. But he kind of came in and handled this in a way that he felt as though was best, and then went on to develop his ideology of applying this to the Middle East as well, as the Soviet Union was trying to grow their influence. So this is all the Truman Doctrine if you're going to apply it to something. Next, we have Cuba. So Fidel Castro was a communist. He cut off trade with the U.S., so basically the U.S. freaked out. Eisenhower planned the Bay of Pigs invasion, but Kennedy took over and planned under Eisenhower to use Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro and his regime in Cuba. This was a failure. You're not going to hear about the little nitty-gritty, but you should know that Kennedy's Bay of Pigs was known as an upset. It was known as an embarrassment. He basically embarrassed America. He had 400 Cuban exiles moved ashore at the Bay of Pigs on the southern coast of Cuba. They failed to send off a general uprising as planned. He basically thought that everyone would go with these Cuban exiles, and they didn't. Nobody supported them. It was kind of them by themselves. And therefore, this whole uprising that Kennedy tried to start completely failed. So if you have to know anything about the Bay of Pigs, you know, Marina, no, we've not. You need to know that it was a failure. Basically, people mainly died. That's what you need to know. That's exactly how it was a failure if you really want to know. But it was in 1962. We're going to move also into the Cuban Missile Crisis, where throughout the summer and early fall of 1962, the Soviets decided to build up arms in Cuba and to protect Cuba from American invasion. And Kennedy issued a stern warning against any offensive weapons in Cuba. Oh, the Bay of Pigs. Yeah, exactly it. The Bay of Pigs is a failed invasion to overthrow Castro and was known as being an upset. Just know that it was a complete failure. No one successfully overthrew the government, and Kennedy looked really bad. But he kind of, redeemed himself with the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, where basically he told Soviets to take their missiles out of Cuba because it's a little too close to America, and therefore he was not having that. Kennedy oversaw the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he's the one that made sure that all the missiles were removed from Cuba, therefore to remove the threat to America, because geographically they are very close. Cuba's only a couple, I don't want to say a couple, but not too many miles in between that and Florida. So imagine how much damage that could do with 90. Thank you. I knew it was close. So it's very close. A lot of damage can be done. And therefore, Kennedy was like, we need to basically stop the Soviets. And thank you. We're going to look at societal changes in 1950s. This is a bit of a switch up. Yes, I was going to ask if anybody had any questions on that slide. Let me go back so you can ask them in the chat. The Cuban Missile Crisis is big because it was so close to us. Think about, yes, we did go to Turkey. It was kind of a drawback. So the U.S. had to take a lot of their missiles out of Turkey, which is close to the Soviet Union, and they had to take all their missiles out of Cuba, which is close to us. The Warsaw Pact is the Soviet retaliation against NATO. You don't need to know that very deeply. So think about that. Bay of Pigs, failure. Cuban Missile Crisis, positive. We did not talk about SALT. I did skip that. We're going to go back. So SALT was the first limited exchange between the two superpowers and 200 anti-ballistic missiles apiece. So the second froze the number of ballistic missiles for a 5-year period. Just know that this is kind of like a very, I don't want to say a peace treaty because calling it a peace treaty is crazy, but they're strategic arms limitation talks. These two countries were doing what's called brinkmanship. They were bringing each other to the brink of war. The Cuban Missile Crisis almost ended in a very bad way. They almost sent hundreds of missiles to each other. Brinksmanship, I can put that in the chat for you. It should be that. I'm horrible at spelling, so I'm hoping that's it for you. But this idea that they were, in a sense, pushing each other to the brink. Like if you fill up a cup of water and it's about to spill over, it's on the brink. They were pushing each other to see who would break first, and the strategic arms limitation talks kind of calm that down. So I'm going to look. SALT is just the name of the thing. It's strategic arms limitation talks. Yes, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the almost nuclear war ended with that. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Joelle, yes, they were. Tabitha, to an extent, I think you can definitely say that people had peace of mind with it. Like there's a little bit, the brinkmanship's kind of ended. Yes, mutually assured destruction kind of is brinkmanship. If one person started, then everybody's going to start. It's the idea that if America decided to attack, exactly, it's pure hysteria. The idea that if America is like, we're going to attack the USSR, they're getting attacked right back. So neither country really wanted to do it, but at the same time, you don't want to look like I don't know a nice way of saying it. I'm trying to think of like the clean way of saying it, but you don't want to look like the bad. You don't want to look like the scaredy cat in the situation. You don't want to look like the guy who's like doesn't know what they're doing. I don't know if you want to consider it a tente. That's a little bit extreme, I think. France and England were trying to recover after World War II. So they were struggling on their own accord. So we're going to move from the policy of containment back until society changes in the 1950s. So the thing about this period is it goes back and forth, and it's really hard to understand all the different changes going in with it. But, am I frozen? Am I? Okay, we're good. Scared me. So the issue with this is that there's a lot going on here. There's a lot. You're going from Cold War, containment policy, Truman Doctrine, all these different things, all back to like society in America. So you're dealing with a lot of international issues and domestic, but you do need to have like a good grasp on everything. So the first thing we really need to understand is the GI Bill. So I don't know if you ever heard of like G.I. Jane, or like, that's how I remembered it because I've watched the movie, but like G.I. Jane, G.I. Joe. It's how I remember that it has to do with the military. And the GI Bill was passed in 1944 and provided education and housing benefits for white veterans returning from World War II. That's all you really need. It's nothing like crazy. That's just how I remembered what it had to do with. I think I might have had a multiple choice question on it, but I associated it based off that. And if Will Smith helps you remember that too, I'm happy to help you with that. That's not what he called her. The baby boom. This is another thing I feel like you need to kind of conceptualize. I feel like it's easier because we call people boomers and stuff. So the term is like well distributed. No, the GI Bill did not benefit African Americans, especially during this time. The baby boom was caused by a number of factors. The GI Bill, once again, provided education and housing benefits for white veterans returning from World War II. So the baby boom. Once again, it's a lot of this idea that we call people boomers. We have an idea that they're kind of old, but what does that even mean? Baby boomers were caused by a number of factors, including the return of soldiers from World War II, the availability of affordable housing, and the prosperity of post-war economy. For lack of a better way to say it, a lot of people were having kids, therefore there was a boom. So this prosperity, once again, people felt as though they were economically secure and they could have children. And once again, they were, I guess, really want families. But in addition to this introduction of new technologies, such as the washing machine and the refrigerator, it also made it easier for families to take care of children. It wasn't as, we moved into a different technological age where having children was a lot easier, honestly. And with the GI Bill helping people buy houses and providing education, not only could they advance economically, but they could establish a family safely. So also we have the significant impact on the country's economy, as a large number of children born during the baby boom helped to drive the consumer spending and economic growth. With the baby boom, generation would later become the backbone of the workforce and the driving force behind the economy during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So if you really remember that, boomers are old. That's what we call them, boomers, but they kind of fall within the era of growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that's what kind of revolutionized America within that time. Socially, politically, economically, all that fun stuff. So with the high demand for housing after the war, as well as the baby boom, it resulted in the construction boom. They had to house all these people now. It did happen after World War II. Many people moved from urban areas to the suburbs in search of new homes and a better way of life. Yes, the baby boom generation are kind of also the counterculture generation. They're overlap a bit, I think, like the older ones, but they really help push that movement. So what we have here is that also, in addition to the construction boom and just people moving out of cities to the suburbs because they want to have bigger homes and stuff, it is also the establishment of better railroads, better highways, infrastructure that also push people to move toward the suburbs. So we have Levittown, which is kind of like if you have to really remember the suburban community and all that stuff. Yes, the Levittown was the invention of future neighborhoods, simply. William J. Levitt led to the development of post-war suburbia with his building and promotion of Levittown. It was a 17,000 mass project for low-price family homes on Long Island, New York. So remember Long Island? I don't know if you ever know New York geography, but it's like the suburbs in comparison to New York City. It has a warmer climate, lower taxes, and economic opportunities in defense-related industries attracted GIs and many of their family also to move to the Sun Belt states. That's another thing you might see come up, where this is a region of the United States that includes southern and southwestern states because they have warm weather, a growing population, and a lot of people are migrating there. So this is kind of where you see like the cookie cutter, like keeping up with the Joneses ideology. This thing about keeping up with the suburbs and the suburban life and getting all the new technology like a refrigerator and a washing machine, you wanted to keep up with it. You wanted to be revolutionizing. You want to be keeping it up. And yes, he was. Yes, there was not a lot of Black people, if any, in Levittown. So that's kind of where you're going to see the social changes. We're moving from, with more people being born, with the establishment of southern states and the GI Bill helping both of those occur, and people moving out toward the southern and the southwestern states, we're seeing the American society kind of evolve and set it up for the counterculture that's going to occur in like 10 to 20 years. So, yes, it is a continuity. Look at you guys. The Sun Belt states are states that people move to because they're warm, essentially. So think California. It's basically Florida, kind of to California, some people say, but think more so Florida. People move to Florida now because it's warm and it has a lot of opportunities, essentially. A lot of people, older people move to Florida. It has a growing population this time period and has a lot more job opportunities. So we're going to move on to the next slide. There's no questions, which is the Great Society. They moved because population was doing well, the economy was doing well, and life was just great. And I guess they wanted to expand and move on. It was just overall this development of a society that is now doing so well economically, not so much politically, that it's evolving socially. So now we have the Great Society. This is going to reflect a lot of what you've probably already seen and remember from yesterday about the FDR New Deal, because Johnson, the guy who becomes president right after JFK is shot and assassinated, becomes president and declares his war on poverty. His program is basically a domestic policy, which he called the Great Society, that leans on the ideologies of FDR. FDR was one of his heroes, and Johnson's a cool dude. I like Johnson, top 5 presidents. And he really just chill. I like him. He becomes president and basically declares war on poverty through all of these initiatives. First, we have Medicare and Medicaid. Yeah, we're gonna ignore Vietnam in my statement that he's the best one. I'm just talking about the Great Society. Y'all, let me have my favorites, please. Thank you. So we have Medicare and Medicaid. So this was the first initiative of his Great Society, where it mandated health insurance under the Social Security program for the Americans over the age of 65 and a supplemental Medicaid program for the poor. So this is basically where we see Medicaid and Medicare still exist to this day, that the elderly and the poor have Medicare and medical insurance. This is very liberal ideology. If one thing you should know about Johnson and his Great Society is that it is liberal. You're going to see, I remember this on my test, it's going to talk about, if it's talking about liberalism, you should remember the Great Society. So Medicare would be a part of his war on poverty. A big thing about poverty and this idea of staying within poverty is that medical and medical insurances, a lot is very expensive. I mean, even now, it's not cheap now, but it's certainly not cheap then. So, therefore, it costs a lot of money, and a lot of people who are beneath the poverty line cannot afford medical insurance. So we also look at the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provided more than $1 billion in federal aid, the largest going to school districts with the highest percentage of impoverished students. So this is also, once again, a lot of these can be found now. We kind of have a lot of these with a lot of these still are till this day running. But this is the idea that schools in lower income neighborhoods are receiving money. Schools with lower income students are receiving money in order to support them and uplift their educational journey. No, you guys are still debating. On the exam, there are 55 questions. I don't know if that's what you're asking. No, FDR, pretty sure FDR was a Democrat. So yes, but I'm pretty sure they're both Democrats. And we're going to see a shift from Democrats to Republicans at the end of this period and beginning of the next. So next, after the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, we have the Food Stamp Act, which expanded the federal program to help poor people with food stamps. Once again, still a program that's up and running today. Helped the impoverished. JFK was a Democrat. Receive the ability to buy food and to support themselves. Remember, this is all objectives to help poor people, essentially. There's a National Foundation of Arts and Humanities, which provided federal funding for the arts and other creative and scholarly projects. Then we have the Higher Education Act, which provided federal scholarships for college education, and Child Nutrition Act, which added breakfast to the school lunch program. Now, as people living in America, I think we can all say that all of these are still within our society. That is interesting. Most schools require you to, or at least have breakfast if you want them. And at least we're going to do an LEQ after this. So, stick around. But yeah. So, once again, remember, Great Society, it's a liberal ideologies. Hundreds of laws and programs will be passed as part of the Great Society, increasing liberalism and belief in the efficacy, wow, Zoe, I read that wrong, of the government to achieve social goals. These initiatives span attempts to end racial discrimination, eliminate poverty, and improve overall education. So we're going to move on. I feel like everyone's got a good grasp on this one. We're still going on about breakfast. Okay, now we have the civil rights. The alphabet soup is FDR. It's based off that, should go. So now we have the civil rights movement. I feel like it's like most people's favorite part. So yesterday we talked, I think we might have talked a little bit about the Brown versus Board of Education, but the best way I remember it is that it's connected directly to Plessy versus Ferguson. And I know we talked about Plessy versus Ferguson to death. Remember, that legalized and illegalized discrimination. Therefore, it allowed for separate but equal. Sophie Brown v. Board of Education said that separate but equal is no longer valid. It is unconstitutional. Therefore, schools need to be desegregated. So Brown v. Board of Education, no more separate but equal, and public schools need to be desegregated. How quickly that happens? Not very quickly, but it is one example of the civil rights movement in America and the impact of it on the Americans. Then we have the Birmingham bus boycotts. So this is when a bunch of people boycotted the bus system after the arrest of Rosa Parks to say that Black people should not be forced to sit in the back. And they should be able to sit wherever they please on the bus. This occurred by a large percentage of Black people in Birmingham refusing to ride the bus, therefore losing the buses a lot of money. This was very effective. Pretty sure they are. Hold on. They would be an act of civil disobedience. And civil disobedience really ties into Martin Luther King's entire thing, especially with the letter from a Birmingham jail. And it's right here. And we're also going to talk about freedom rides, sit-ins. All of these are examples of the civil disobedience. My screen keeps on freezing. I'm sorry. So civil disobedience, this idea that in order to start change and to incite change, you need to basically break the rules a little bit. You need to resist non-violently, which is also an ideology it is the Montgomery bus. Yeah, I read it wrong too. It's the Montgomery in the notes, but it's the Montgomery bus boycotts. I'm sorry. I didn't even see that till now. I read it as the Montgomery bus boycotts. But once again, this idea of civil disobedience is that in order to incite change, it should be nonviolent resistance. You need to show the world, like through the freedom rides, the sit-ins, the bus boycotts, that these rules are inherently unfair. They are unconstitutional. They are unequal. Therefore, we need to disobey them. We need to show people that we are impactful. We have a voice, meaning Black people have a voice, and therefore can speak out against these things. So that is civil disobedience. That's a letter of letter from a Birmingham jail, and yes, it can be connected to Thoreau. We're also going to look on the alarming children's crusade, the influence of television on publicizing these things. Also, the March on Washington, I have a dream speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial, and overall, how a lot of I don't know what the notes are here for, but the March on Washington, I have a dream speech, which really launched and helped launch Martin Luther King and his message into the forefront in 1963, only a year before his assassination. We're also going to see Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. This is not as talked about in the curriculum for remember, but leaving prison in 1952, Malcolm X acquired a reputation as the movement's most controversial voice. He criticized Martin Luther King as an Uncle Tom, who was someone who's subservient to the white race, and advocated for self-defense using Black violence in order to counter white violence. Eventually, he left Black Muslims and moved away from defending violence, but was assassinated by Black opponents in 1965. So, some advocated for Black power and racial separatism. Their leader called for African Americans to form their own institutions, create unions, co-ops, political parties, and even write their own history. The Black Panthers, as someone just asked, in 1966, the Black Panthers were organized as a revolutionary social movement advocating self-rule for American Blacks. In April 1968, the nation went into shock over the news that Martin Luther King died while standing on the motel balcony in Memphis. So I was just about to say that, Z. Thank you so much. I was going to say, if you ever get an essay comparing W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, which would be a really cool essay, by the way, this would be a great way to connect it to like the now, or not the now, but another period in history if you really want to do that. They're basically like the modern, what I was really going to say was the modern Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois. A lot of their arguments revolve around the same points. So, yes, MLK, all about civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance. You know one thing about him, it is that. Yes, thank you, Andrea. I did not have an acronyms here. So following the civil rights movement, we're also going to see civil rights achievements. I mean, we can talk for days about what different people did to promote civil rights in America and how the civil rights movement, but we also need to talk about what are the impacts and what on a legislative level happened because of this movement. So first, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a very important piece of information that should be highlighted. So Civil Rights Act in 1964 made racial discrimination illegal in motels, hotels, restaurants, and other places of public accommodation. Therefore, it forbade discrimination in employment based on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, or gender. So I'm seeing some questions pop up about Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. That was in an earlier unit. They both have different ideals, and Washington was rooted in that Black prosperity is found within Black finding your own like economic prosperity. Meanwhile, Du Bois was a lot more about social change. That's about it. I can slow down. I got you, Mika. And Plessy versus Ferguson, remember, allowed separate but equal. So, once again, Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act was not only for Black people or for the race, about racism. It also helped advance anti-xenophobia, anti-religious, and also sexism. So private places could not still discriminate based on race. It kind of makes, I know this is like public accommodation, but technically hotels, motels, and restaurants are private institutions, but they can no longer privately say that they cannot stay there. Why was it so hard for me to get out? Additionally, we see the creation of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So the EEOC. I did not see it on my exam, but it might come up, so you should be familiar with it. This monitor and enforces protections against job discrimination. So everyone was asking about like how does it protect job discrimination? The Civil Rights Act says that you cannot discriminate based off all of these different criteria. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission enforces that. So knowing this and maybe seeing on the exam being able to identify it is definitely very important. Also, the Civil Rights Act provided and withheld federal grants from state and local governments and other institutions that practice racial discrimination, and authorized the U.S. Department of Justice to initiate lawsuits to desegregate public schools and facilities. So, this actually propelled, I guess you could say, the decision of Brown v. Board. We're seeing that beginning of anti-discrimination and the desegregation of schools, but the Civil Rights Act not only desegregated schools or different areas of workplace and overall public accommodations, but it's for all public places, and it also helps more than just the Black race or any race. It helps women, disabled people, different religions as well. So, hold on. I think my screen keeps on blurring out. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. So this prohibits discriminatory voting practices. States with the history of voting discrimination need to get pre-clearance from the federal government. And the 24th Amendment, no poll tax. Top amendments. So, our one we just talked about the civil rights movement and the achievements that stem because of it. It is very important in civil rights. So, no problem. So we're going to move on, if everyone's good on this. Poll tax, if you remember from, I want to say what's the idea. I'm trying to see what the unit is. It's more around the unit of Reconstruction, right after Black people gained the right to vote because of the 15th Amendment. It created a barrier. So once we have Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, kind of like set this thing in motion that you can create a lot of barriers as long as it's separate. So Black people could vote, yes, but if they didn't have the money to pay to vote, therefore they couldn't. And since Black people were systematically poor and systematically at a disadvantage, therefore they could not vote. So that is the poll tax. We're also going to look at, well, you can also look at the different types of discrimination then. Grandfather, there we go. Thank you, Leah. I was going to say literacy test, grandfather clauses, anything to prevent voting. So the next one. We're ready. These are other movements for equality. So we have the National Organization for Women Now, the Secure Equal Treatment of Women, especially for job opportunities. So this is really where we see kind of building off of the Joel, yes, that is it. The National Organization for Women is building off of the Civil Rights Act and is securing equal treatment for women, especially in job opportunities. And they're still actively working to promote this. I mean, we still have equal pay is not as equal as it should be. And we're going to see that with the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Civil Rights Act again of 1964. It's the same one. But this both prohibited the discrimination in employment and compensation on the basis of sex, but they were poorly enforced. I mean, we can look at this now. Equal pay is not fully enforced. There's still a large gap, and therefore there's a lot of issues systemically with achieving jobs and achieving the same pay for jobs. So some other things that we could definitely look at is Congress's passage of the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975, which, yes, it's now. But we look at here, Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975 gave reservations and tribal lands a greater control over internal programs, education, and law enforcement. So even from the times of Jackson, there was still a lot of oppression and disdain towards Indian and Native American communities. And this act kind of gave them a lot of power back that was taken away from them and the ability to control their own culture and their societies. Next, we have Title IX. This is something that definitely still takes effect today, especially if you play sports at a public school or are going to play sports in college at a public college. This state that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from any participation in and be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So that's kind of really propelling with women's rights within any federal applied program. So if you really need to understand how this is applied, it's this idea that any program, especially in education, if the federal government gives money to the program, if it's a public program, then women or anyone on the basis of sex cannot be cannot be discriminated against. What I was going to say is Sophie, yes, they leave them alone essentially. So next, we're also going to look at the 2015 Supreme Court decision that ruled I'm going to say that wrong. This Supreme Court case that the 14th Amendment protects the rights of same-sex couples to marry. You're probably not going to see this in the exam. It's basically part of Unit 9. But what you might really see and need to be familiar with is that the Stonewall Inn riots, this emergence that the counterculture also included this fact that, no, don't worry, it's on the exam, just not the specific one because it's kind of out of the scope. But you're definitely going to look at the emergence of pride movements in the 70s especially, and this idea that gay people deserve rights too, that not only should it be based off your gender, but also your sexual orientations. So, happy you like the little color on the slide. So I think we're going to move on to societal reactions in the 1970s. So once again, we're moving on. I know a lot of people ask about the Vietnam War, and this is another war that definitely is attributed to the Cold War. If we're going to bring it all back to the Cold War, this is another one that's connected. It has definitely incited a lot of widespread protests and activism, including the anti-war movement and the draft resistance movement. So a lot of people did not like the Vietnam War. They felt as though it was an unnecessary usage of American resources, And the protests took place in many forms, including marches, rallies, and other acts of civil disobedience, and they played a significant role in shaping the public opinion and pressuring policymakers to change course. So, the Pentagon Papers will be popping up soon. Oh, they're a year, I think. But conservatives believed that the social and cultural changes of the 1960s and 1970s had gone too far. That's what we're going to see more in the conservative movement. So we have the Vietnam War, which is really supported by a lot of liberals, very activist movement, including the anti-war movement and the draft resistance, like I just said. But the conservative movement, we're going to see, emerged in response to these changes, the response with many Americans advocating for the return for traditional values and more limited role for the government society. To remember that the Great Society is the government essentially being very involved in society. The liberal and democratic parties are kind of founded on that in this time, that the government's responsibility is to fix all these issues occurring. And that's what led to the rise of student movements, the opposition to the Vietnam War, the distaste with the social climate of America at the time. But the conservative movement was caused by all this liberalism going on. I mean, America was heavily involved in every aspect of it. With the war on poverty, with the Great Society, with even all of this, we're going to see
Hey guys, it looks like we're having some technical issues. We're just gonna wait to see if Zoe will come back. Hopefully she will. Usually it's just a quick refresh, but if not, then I think Andrea will take the rest of the slides.
This is a great time to take a little break, so
Yeah, I guess we'll just start our break early, guys. So we have 5 minutes. We'll let you guys know when we're starting up again.
I think that this just I got kicked out. I'm coming back now. I just went to the wing, so now this girl is at me.
I saw someone ask me about the Kahoots that I did. I have to be honest, they were not helpful at all. Like the most I remember about it were all the nicknames that I joined with, and I got kicked out for a lot of them. So
I know. Got kicked out.
Zoe's back.
I'm
Yay!
back. It's okay.
We're still gonna continue our break, like we said.
Please do.
So if you guys need water or if you want to eat something, that would be good.
Thank you, Patrick. I do my best. Knowing my water just dripped everywhere. This is going great. Yes, I think you can argue that the conservative movement led to a move back to laissez-faire, and the idea that they wanted the government to take a step back from the economy and overall this is being involved in society so much. because that's kind of what characterizes this era, with a bunch of democratic liberal presidents that are spending a lot of money on the society, which is not necessarily a bad thing, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. Allison, we're just taking a little break.
Yeah, also, after this, the replay will be sent out, so if you guys want to go back to the slides and like the video, you definitely can.
Brooke, I think for the sake of this exam, you can just know that liberals wanted to spend government money more so on like social programs and be more involved. Meanwhile, conservatives were more about the government not being so involved in the economy and spending more money on the military. So it's just government spending in this case. Allison, that's going to be Reagan when he pops up at the end of this period into the 9th.
Okay, guys, we're gonna start in like 2 minutes, so at like 8:12, just for a heads up.
All right, everyone ready?
Who's hype?
Trust me, girl. Z, we're about to get right back into Nixon and all that. So denial just popped up. Okay, let me reshare the slides. Are you ready? We're close. I promise you we're close to the music. So let's get through all this, and I promise you we'll be there. I know. That's the excitement of all this. So we were just on the conservative movement. This idea that the conservatives were opposing these new liberal ideologies and the amount of money being spent on social programs. So we've covered that. We're going to move into the rise of the new right. And the new right was a political movement that emerged in the 1970s and 1980s. And it sought to reshape American politics by emphasizing conservative values such as limited government, free markets, and a strong national defense. So yeah, me neither. I must say me neither, Emmy. That's just you, Delilah. So Ronald Reagan was a big face of this movement, and we're going to see him kind of come back at the end of this period in about 10 years. But another example of this conservative movement and this rise against, I think so too, against social, the social uprising and the amount of money being spent on social programs and to help the poor through the Great Society and different liberal initiatives is the new right, the conservative movement. Have those kind of in there. So the rise of the new right also contributed to the polarization of American politics and the growth of a culture war between the liberals and the conservatives. So if you're wondering how we got here, like where Democrats and Republicans are so far separated and so against each other, it kind of emerges in this right. It's called being polarized. If like you want to get into the political term, they're polarized. American politics is split down the middle, and the growth of a culture war between the liberals and conservatives. So. Next, we're going to see the lack of trust in the government because of the Iranian hostage crisis and the Watergate-Nixon scandal. So first, if we don't remember, the Iranian polarization in terms of the new right is so when conservative movements and the new right, this idea that the conservative party, mainly the Republicans, are emerging and really establishing themselves in this period. They're establishing themselves as really being for more so of a limited government, free market, and a strong national defense. And using that, it's really contradictory to the liberal ideologies and the democratic ideologies of this period, where they were using a lot of money for social and not very limited government. Therefore, with all that, polarized means that they are opposites. It just means that they are butting heads, that they don't like each other. So that's what it means in accordance to the new right. So the Iranian crisis, yes, wasn't Carter's presidency, but we're kind of, a lot of presidents happened during this time. So we got to move through quickly. And conservative ideals, we're talking limited government, free markets, and strong national defense. So a lot of money going toward the military versus social programs. Now, back to the Iranian hostage crisis. This was a major international event that occurred during this period, and it had significant implications for American society and politics. So it's when a group of Iranian militants seized the American embassy in 1979 and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. It's a long time. It's longer than I thought it was. The crisis was a major humiliation for the United States and contributed to the sense of national... I couldn't think of the word. That word is spelled wrongly in my notes. So national chaos and loss of confidence in the government. And then we also have the Watergate-Nixon scandal, where Nixon had a lot of tapes he shouldn't have, essentially. And that led to a lot of people not trusting the government, but also not trusting the democratic government. Remember, all these conservative movements are on the rise, but we have a lot of democratic presidents. So like the Great Depression, where we see this shift towards democratic presidents and we stay there for a long time because of how they're helping America, we're going to see this shift back to Republican presidents because America was no longer trusting of these democratic liberal presidents. They think that Reagan is different He's a Republican, therefore he's going to be different. And Nixon really contributed to this because of his Watergate scandal. If you're not familiar with Watergate, it's a scandal that happened during the Nixon administration where he tried to cover up his involvement in a break-in in the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And there was a lot of tapes of him saying that this happened. And therefore, it was a lot of lying, a lot of deceit, a lot of political corruption, essentially, for any lack of better terms. Nixon was a Democrat, and this led, when this got out to the public, they were very distrusting of the president. And with all the accumulation of the rise of the conservative movement, basically, that they started to shift more toward wanting a conservative Republican president. So now we're going to head to the next slide. Everyone's favorite, a practice quiz. So, Maddie, yes, it was. So please get in there. I'm going to open it up. I haven't opened up the slide yet. Don't worry. Don't worry. Hold on. I got to open up the slide, y'all. I promise. We're getting there. We did do Vietnam, but we're going to do a Q&A, so if you have any more questions about that, just ask them that. Had a really good response. So we always see a shift from liberal to really quote denial. That was perfect. We always see a shift from liberal to conservative values after a major social change. We saw this in the shift from Republican president to FDR, and now Nixon's the Republican. So Nixon was a Republican. I think it got misconstrued here. He's a Republican. But he helped contribute to the overall distrust of Republicans, not over the president during this time. And Reagan kind of seemed like the antithesis of that, the opposite of that, so it made him more of an appealing candidate after. So he was the shift from Democratic to that, but he kind of set the stage for Reagan, how much he loved him at the time. Conservatives during the 80s will be period 9. I got you with the link right here. Bradley does, regardless. we ready? Looks like we're missing a lot of people. I don't want to keep on waiting here for this long. Yeah, I'm going to start the quiz. Yeah, we're about to start. Please join. Whoa. Why is this period 1 and 2? Hold on. Whoa. I'm so sorry. Not you. Hold on, we're having technical difficulties. Stick with me. Hold on. I'm sorry, everyone. It's not you guys. I'm trying. Thank you, Sylvia. I'm struggling. I really couldn't because I can't figure out the screen share, but thank you, Emmy. I'm trying. How's everyone doing? Well, we're all here. Was there any other questions you guys have, or we're all just sitting here and I Thank you. I appreciate you. Is there any other? I'm good. Thank you. I realized someone asked me that back. I appreciate you. So Z, I think the biggest effect of the Vietnam War on the U.S. would be the effect it had on U.S. society. So a lot of people, a lot of younger kids especially, so we're talking college, went against the Vietnam War, spoke actively out against it. So this kind of led to an overall universal distaste for the Vietnam War. It also contributed to a distrust of the president and overall American politics at the time. So that's kind of what we're gonna look about. We're also, my voice crack's been bad this evening. There's an LEQ we're gonna do, and it's all about the Vietnam War, so we can talk more about it. Keep asking questions. Someone asked what's the hardest part about my exam. Oh my god, thank you. The paintings. I'm gonna scroll up because I missed the hardest part about my exam. My SAQs for me. I actually didn't finish one of them. I ran out of space and ran out of time, and I prayed. I got a 5, but I guess I hope the other ones were good enough. I don't know. The general year stuff happened. I think you should be familiar with the major wars and such. So I think what we're going to do here, everyone. Thank you for lacking with what would it take to me. Leah, I finished everything. I think it shows the importance of if you do badly on one part, it doesn't throw away your entire exam. I think it was part C of the 3rd SAQ. I didn't write it. I don't think I got to it. And if I did, I think I wrote 3 words. So I think it shows that if you mess up a little bit and you carry, right, my MCQ, DBQ, hopefully my LEQ, they carried me. So if you mess up, say, on your LEQ, but you got everything else, you could still get a 4 or a 5. So that's kind of to keep you up. I studied probably about a month, but I think that I didn't really do these CRAMs. I think these CRAMs are a lot more helpful. I wouldn't have had all this like collective. Ryan, I think it's if you, I don't want to say you do that badly because I don't think I did that badly in the SAQ, but I think that if you don't do as amazing as you would hope on the DBQ and you do really great in other areas, you definitely could. But definitely try your best. So, what we're going to do here, because of technical difficulties, thank you so much for sticking with me. We're going to move to the LEQ because I know a lot of people were really confused about that. And it's about the Vietnam War. So it's kind of a best of both worlds situation. We're knocking out two different things with one stone. Right, but Ruthie, have hope. But yeah. So we're gonna move on to the LEQ. We're gonna talk a little bit more about the Vietnam War and such. We're getting all into that. So great. Then we're gonna go back to the quiz and back to another Q&A because I know we're still on that. Don't worry. All right, let me know if everyone can see my slides. Can you see it? Everyone let me know. It should say Q&A on it. Beautiful. So, time for everybody's favorite part, the DBQ. Not the DBQ. Wow, I've read that so wrong. The LEQ. So, this LEQ is an older one. I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not like one of the newer ones. But I think it's like helpful to like remember things, and also like a lot of people had a question about the Vietnam War. So we'll take care of that. So the question is to analyze the effects of the Vietnam War on two of the following in the United States from the period of 1961 to 1975. Yeah, so Sophie, I'm so sorry to break it to you, but since this is older, if this was written this year, it would say to an extent on it. Like, it wouldn't be this format. But if it makes you feel better in the moment, it doesn't have it. Arshman, we're going to go back to the test. We had some technical difficulties. We'll get right back to it after this. So this question is basically asking you to take two of the things it's asking here. The presidency talking about you're trying to figure out what effect did the Vietnam War have on America. Sophie, I promise you, we're going to tackle this together. We're going to get through it. Kind of like a cause and effect, but mainly just the effect. And you're going to pick two of them on here. So you're going to pick whether it affects the presidency, the population, Cold War diplomacy, whatever you feel better with in the moment is what you pick. So as someone who's looking at this right now, I think the easiest two are the presidency and the population. If you don't feel great, we're going to talk about the rubric. If you don't feel great about Cold War diplomacy, meaning anything about the Cold War, do not do it. This is one of those things that you're like, oh, like, okay, I know about the presidents during this time. I know about the population and the counterculture movement. This, if you don't know too much about Cold War, don't do it. So, someone asked about ABGov. I don't really think, no, this is not something you'd really see in ABGov, but I will tell you that this is probably a harder type of question than what you're going to see. It's just that not very many recent ones have been on the Vietnam War, and I wanted to really get that in here. So, we're going to talk about that. Someone said, on God. All right. So the LEQ rubric, I feel like I was really confused about this when I took it. And it was, there's 1 point for the thesis. You need to create a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. This just means, please clearly say, Sophie, we'll talk about that, don't worry. So, Alice, actually, that was a great question. I would love to go back to answer that question because so if you saw this today, it would be more like, to which extent did the Vietnam War affect the power of the president or affect the population of, so you would have more of that connotation, or the president and the population. It would ask you to what extent it is doing it. Therefore, so you can have more of an argument question, but that's really it. Literally, I think, yeah, I wrote my AP Lit essay today, and I really went off the idea that if you can create an argument and defend it in some way possible, they're literally going to be like, okay, like, you gave an argument. As long as it's historically correct, you gave an argument and you answered a question. So that's the thesis. You should be somewhere very clearly within your essay giving a thesis. Then you get 1 point for contextualization, which describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. So basically, you're not just giving the answer. You're not just saying, here's the answer, move on. You're not just saying, the president was affected by such and such. You're giving background. You're making sure the reader knows that you know what you're talking about. So you get 2 points for evidence. So you get evidence that supports an argument in response to a prompt using specific and relevant examples of evidence. And you get 2 points for analysis and reasoning. So this has not been updated. I don't think. Is it not? Am I crazy? Is my laptop once again giving up on me? I think it is. So it's okay. Within that analysis and reasoning is where you're going to see that complexity. Do not worry about the complexity. I cannot emphasize enough. It's so unnecessary. You don't need to get it. Like, as someone said, 1 to 3% get it. Don't kill yourself to get that. There's so much more important to get your thesis, your contextualization, your evidence, than to get that one thesis point. A 5 out of 6 is still an amazing essay. Not even that to make you feel better. It is an amazing essay. Don't get so caught up on a complexity point. So, this is the thesis that the College Board liked. That president elections were heavily influenced by this war and the population between 18 and 35 years old. In other words, college students were also profoundly influenced by the Vietnam War. So this one, as you can see, the person said college students because it's 18 to 35. So they're like, oh, we're just going to call them college students. But this person just gave a claim. They said what they're going to be arguing, and the College Board accepts this as a thesis. Your thesis does not need to be special. It just needs to claim. It is claiming that the presidential elections and college students, or 18 to 35-year-olds, were affected by the Vietnam War. Now, right now, if you want to really make this a better piece, I personally would add a little bit more of line of reasoning to this thesis. But the College Board liked it, so I'm not going to argue with it. This person got a really high score, so. So paragraph 1 could be about your presidency. So this person wrote their first paragraph about the presidency and what they felt as though they were affected by the how they're affected by my laptop just keeps on fritzing out at me. I'm so sorry. A background paragraph, I think, no. You need to incorporate your background information within your paragraph. So yeah, I'd say that your LEQ for me was 4 paragraphs. I wrote a 5-paragraph DBQ essay, and I just didn't have the time to sit there and write another 5-paragraph essay. So I kind of made really long paragraphs, but some people make shorter 5-paragraph essays. Whatever your teacher taught you, whatever works for you, I think is the best thing. But I don't think you need to put it in a paragraph. If you want to put in a paragraph, that's up to you. It's whatever works best for you, essentially. Okay. So we're going to talk about, so the Vietnam War diminishes the president's or the Americans' faith in their government. It shatters the liberal consensus and ends the age of Roosevelt, making it possible making the age of Reagan possible. So this sounds kind of like what we just talked about, but kind of not. A lot of confusing things going on here. But I want to note this is directly from the College Board. I didn't make it up because I wanted to be as accurate as possible. But here we have, and also that the people lose faith in the president. So the symbol of the United States, and also Congress does too. So what examples would you use? I mean, this is a kind of a heavy one. There's a lot going on, but this would definitely lead to talking about Nixon, Eisenhower. Maybe if you want to do a little background about how this containment started, that's how I would have done if I wanted a good enough context. I would have kind of reached back a little bit more, established a little bit of precedent, but really focused it on Nixon. I think, Eisenhower. Wow, I messed up my presidents here. But Dwight Eisenhower articulates his domino theory regarding Vietnam and really establishing his own version of containment. That is probably what I would use as my really driving home to it. And like Daniela and Emmy are saying, you want to restate your thesis. You want to make sure you're establishing broad enough and correct historical context. Yes. Remember, you don't necessarily need to have a conclusion, but you should always have a intro. And also, if your handwriting is horrible, it's okay. Don't make it too bad. But so that would be my main argument for presidency. I would use Eisenhower, his works within Vietnam, and how that essentially contributed to how Americans lost faith in their government. This is what the College Board also said, that this is probably the most logical argument you could take for presidency. Next, we have population 18 to 25. Now, some of you already hit on it, but using the rise of social movements and the overall deliberation over the Vietnam War is probably your best bet. This is probably, in my opinion, the best one to use. I would have picked this one automatically because, you always talk about the Kent State University riot or how the National Guard opened fire on them. A lot of you asked about that. The Vietnam War caused a lot of counterculture, caused a lot of uprise, caused a lot of issues in the 70s, and it's something we really went over in depth. I know you guys went a lot of in depth in your classes. So when you do this, when I read this, I was like, that's the first thing I would have thought of. It definitely incited the younger generation. It definitely caused a lot of uprising. And a lot of you said it did lead to the eventual passing of the 26th Amendment and the lowering of the voting age as the younger people were becoming more involved in politics. So that would be my effect on the younger population in 18 to 25. Do you have any questions? How do you connect your evidence to your thesis? So I'm going to go back to the thesis. The thesis here was presidential elections were heavily influenced by this war. You already said in your thesis what they were. So now your evidence should be directly what you said in your thesis. Don't go off. Make sure when you write your thesis, make sure it's concise, make sure it's specific. You don't want to write about something you're not actually going to write about in your paper, or don't write too much in your thesis. If you said presidential elections were heavily influenced by the war, and so were the population between 18 and 35 years old, they need to write about that. Yes, for the DBQ, please do not quote the docs. Okay. And there's no citing on the LEQ at all. There's no documents. It's all you. And you do not need a conclusion. We stopped sharing and reshare just because we lost a lot of slides when we did this. Thank you guys for sticking with me through the technical difficulties. There's been a lot, but same thing. Yeah. ahead and go back. All right. Thank you, Blair. I'm trying. You got, okay. You know what? Let's talk about DBQ a little bit more, the LEQ, because I feel like that's really a point of confusion here. So for the body paragraph here in 1, I would have used Eisenhower. And you can also use it overall when we talked about presidential elections and that shift in presidential reception by the public. You can go into that as well, how the Vietnam War really changed how the youth saw and overall how America saw the president and overall who's supposed to be the leader and symbol of the United States. So that would be my evidence for it. Nathan, I suggest you find in a specific event, but it doesn't need to be super specific. But I do think, like, you know, you shouldn't just say like the Vietnam War affected presidents. Give them something a little more substantial. No, dates are not really needed for president. If you don't remember when someone was elected, they're not going to take the point off. Yes, Z, you definitely could. Yes, your evidence here, it's very clear prompt 1961 to 1975. Your evidence should not, when you're writing your thesis, your evidence should not go out beyond that, nor should whatever evidence you're using. But if you're trying to connect it to something else, then that makes sense, but don't defend your thesis with something from like 1700. Yes, we are. I just want to make sure this is all taken care of. And I promise you, if either we can address that during the Q&A. We're going to go back a second. But yes, Gabrielle is correct. Yes, Isabel. So we're going to start the quiz, if that's okay with everybody, unless we want to review this a little bit more. Whatever's good with you guys. Quiz time. I like the idea of quiz time. Okay. There we go. We're back. We're going to go in new and improved quiz. That's going to work thanks to Denilah. Thank you, Denilah. You saved me. Hold on. I'm getting you this link. Thank you, Faith. Give them quiz time. I'm getting there. You're getting there. We're going right now. Get the link. Make sure there's a link. Everything. Get the link in the chat. The music is here. Everyone's the link. And we're gonna miss you. We'll give you like another minute or two. Everyone get in there. What's the guys? Sorry. I gotta play the samosa. That's about as much as I'm limited to here. When I start the quiz, 3, 2, 1. Alright, I'm gonna lower this music a little bit. I think it's real distracting. So, I didn't get to read the question. What drove the U.S. to officially enter the war? The Cold War. The Cold War, specifically. I'm guessing. No, the Vietnam War. I'm so sorry. I have not seen these questions either. I'm sorry. Alright, we're learning together. That's my computer's filtering. Yes. Hey guys, we got questions on Vietnam. We're going to answer them all after this question. Vietnam War. Sophie, you can just join now. It's okay. No questions have been done. You're good. Use the link I just sent or the QR code. Yeah, but say try refreshing the page, see if that's the issue. All right, reveal the answer. It was the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So I feel like we need a refresher on what each of these are. That's cool. It's fine. So remember, we have, although Johnson inherited his advisors in Vietnam, he supersized America's presence and used the Gulf of Tonkin to really throw America in the loop. Supersize. Once again, if you need the QR code, I'm going to scroll up a little bit. So that's really what started the event. Remember the Berlin Wall? That really wouldn't be this. Kind of in a different continent. Then we have the Tet Offensive, which is kind of in the middle of it all. It's kind of what shakes the people's confidence in the war. So it didn't start the war, but it really fuels anti-war demonstrators and calls for people to want to bring the troops back home. So out of all of these, the Gulf of Tonkin incident is what starts the war, and we see the Gulf of Tonkin resolution because of it, because people thought Johnson was doing a little too much with that one. Denila is really saving us all in the chat. So please, Denila gives a wonderful explanation in the chat about the Vietnam War if you were still a little bit confused about it. So, and the Viet Cong is a group of people event. So, next question. Who was the leader of South Vietnam during this time? Now, we did go over this, but try to reach back in. You guys just did Unit 8. See if you can kind of remember it. Start on yes. It's okay. If you don't know, we're going to talk about it. Don't worry. You don't need to memorize the leaders, but you should be kind of familiar with their names, Trent. Yeah. Go with the one you recognize, and if you don't recognize, we'll go over it. Yeah. All right. So it's B. A was the Communist Party in China. Remember, we talked about how the whole Chinese Civil War, and like I said, Dina, you don't need to memorize this, but like you should be able to look at these and be like, that reminds me of this war or this event. So if you see it on the multiple choice question, or maybe as a source on a DBQ, you'll be able to kind of use it as a background information if you want to. But yes, D would be the leader of the North during this time, and C is just not relevant to this at all right now. But okay, our next question. All right, so how did popular music change after the advent of mass marketing? So A became formulaic and less experimental, became more experimental and less formulaic, became less commercially viable, became less popular amongst teenagers. What are we thinking? Give another like 30 seconds. Do I get the number to like 150? Became more formulaic and less experimental. So I feel like we're confused on what like formulaic means. It is definitely like an ACT word. Formulaic is constituting or containing a verbal formula or set of words. That was a really like formal definition. So in this case, it's like more set, it's more strict, more like by a form, if you shall say, because it's definitely like one of those. So by mass marketing, yeah, it follows a pattern. Like think about commercials and stuff, or even like the music that you hear on the radio. It follows a formula. Popular music follows a certain type of ratio that needs to like fall into. So because of that, music became a little less experimental and moved back into like a very like organized formula. Yes, marketing is all about formulas, so they just have a formula for it. You're going to see this throughout the 50s and move toward like the counterculture, right before counterculture, where music starts to like take over and really become something different. Which of the following best describes the Beat generation? Brooke, so it would become more experimental during the counterculture, but right before that, when we're looking like everyone's loving suburbs and like this white picket fence idea, they like the idea, mass marketing and the way that music was marketed did a very like strict formulaic system. It's very like, it followed a formula. That's what formulaic really means. It follows a basis in order to get people to like it more. Like I said, music on the radio now follows a radio, follows a formula. That would be the counterculture. You know what I'm trying to say later? Like right before counterculture, people like formula, and that's what made counterculture so revolutionary. No, we've not. But we're trying to like go into things we haven't gone over, see what you remember, so that when you go in the Q&A, you kind of have more questions. Because you guys always say it's so easy, so now it won't be so easy. So yeah. You guys are right. A group of post-war World War II writers and artists who rejected mainstream American culture. So let's just think about in the context of this period, post-World War II, everyone's kind of like reforming American culture. We're trying to figure out what it is. So yes, Tyler would have loved this. So it really wouldn't be a group of Hollywood actors. And it wouldn't be, I could see why some people might have picked D, because definitely within that time period. But we're really looking at the fact that the Beat generation was trying to rejuvenalize and reject what is now American culture through writings and art. Love you guys using Lana and Tyler to get this. So, what is the religious right and what was the impact on American politics after 1945? So, A, movement of atheists who became politically active in support of secularism and humanism. Ava, yes. B, a movement of conservative Christians who became politically active in support of conservative candidates and issues. C, a movement of religious leaders who became politically active in opposition to the Vietnam War. D, a movement of liberal Christians who became politically active in support of progressive candidates and issues. The lost gen are people after World War I who were kind of like in disillusion after the war and didn't really know their place in society. You're going to think about Hemingway and a lot of writers like that who really wrote about finding themselves. I mean, I'm not a big Hemingway fan, but they were very depressed. Yes, is very how they're characterized. So this is another one. This is another one where they kind of like revolutionize. Brooke, that's such a hot take. Not one I agree with, but a hot take. I give it to you. Ooh, we got a lot of Hemingway supporters in here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. Try to get like 10 more people on here. Right, Denial. I'm not really liking all of this Hemingway support. Wow. I'm just gonna click reveal answer. So once again, majority. That's good. I'm liking the Matthew. I see you. Thank you. Anti-Hemingway stand up. But so back to my point. Not The Great Gatsby, but Delilah, truest thing you said all night. But the answer to this question is B, because a movement of conservative Christians who became politically active in support of conservative candidates and issues. So remember, if you think about religion at any point, typically lean toward the conservative ideals. Typically, religious movements have their roots in conservatism. But yeah, I could see why D would be chosen. But remember, around this time, especially political activism is important, and especially with conservative Christians. So I'm happy you guys like The Great Gatsby. Thank you. Ooh. You're not wrong though. You're not wrong though. I won't. For the sake of history, I won't comment. So, which of the following was a major initiative of the Great Society aimed at protecting the environment? Come on, y'all. I say this is the one that we can get 100% on. So if you remember, what is the Great Society about? Helping the poor. So, remember he said, how can we help the poor? Remember people, what can they, there's welfare, there's the breakfast thing. Come on, we got this. Gotcha. Remember the breakfast, you all went crazy over this like an hour and a half ago. Oh my god, wait, did I read my own question wrong. I have a migraine, wait. I was so confident he was asking about education the whole time. Wow. I was literally giving you all the wrong advice. Yeah, but you all can get this stuff. Don't listen to me. I'm losing my mind. Alright, I think we're ready. Y'all, I had high expectations for you. So environment, National Environmental Policy Act. So like education wouldn't really go into that. Voting Rights Act was also not really the Great Society, but the Federal Aid Highway Act, that would be the Great Society. It's okay though. We have great intentions. Remember, you're right, Delana. It is. Each of those acts had different effects. So the National Education Act really worked for promoting education, especially in lower income neighborhoods. The Environmental Act was the Great Society's act on promoting the environment. The Highway Act helped to expand highways in order to help people move across the country. Definitely helped the infrastructure. And the other one was the Voting Act. To remember, was to remove discrimination within voting officially. Arshwan, we're gonna go right into period 9 in literally like 2 minutes. Stick around for a little bit longer. This is probably the last thing. Yes. Once again, which of the following was a key aspect of the Great Society's approach to fighting poverty? A, encouraging private businesses to invest in poor communities. B, expanding welfare programs. C, decreasing government spending on social programs. And D, providing tax cuts for wealthy individuals. We're making connections to other periods. It is. We're going to reveal the answer. You know what? That was the highest we've gotten all day, and this was great. Remember, a lot of their key to fighting poverty then and now is to expand access and create welfare programs. Welfare programs are designed to help the lower classes in various different ways. Think the Food Stamp Act, education bills, and all that stuff. So 94%, I'll also take that. But I want to have enough time for your DBQ and the other one. So I'm going to give it to Andrea. She's going to start, if she's okay with that. Unit 9. I think she is because she came up. So I'm going to go.
Here I am. Whoops. Zoe, are you still going to share the screen?
Yeah, I'm going to switch it over right now for you.
All right, guys. We are going to talk about Unit 9. Thank you, someone. Is it commonly tested? It is 5% of the exam. So, it's going to be a lot less than, oh, wait, go back. Go back a little bit. It's going to be the content we're going to move through kind of quickly, and I'll show you what mostly comes up about it, and that is conservatism. And that's because we touched upon it earlier when we were talking about period 8, because a lot of the seeds of conservatism begin in the 1960s and build throughout the 70s, and then culminate in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan, which some people call the Reagan Revolution. So we'll see a DBQ that really asks about this new wave of conservatism, and kind of you need to know how we got there in 1980. The turn of the 21st century, so the 90s and the early 2000s, might be a multiple choice set. I've never seen a short answer question on it, but it technically could be, but you won't see kind of too much on it. So we're just going to hit the highlights today. I'm sure you guys are going to have a ton of questions about this because it's our most recent history. And so for me personally, I've lived through it. It's always weird teaching history you've lived through, but I'm going to try to answer your questions as much as I can, but also keep it relevant to what we need to know for this exam that's coming up on Friday. So we can move to the next one and talk about new conservatism. And I saw that a lot of you guys had questions about this. Why is this super important? Yes, it'll probably come up on the exam, but also this is a really good explainer for a lot of the politics that we're living through today. Like, we're seeing the culmination of this new conservatism or this conservative movement that really started in the mid 20th century. Yes, so neocons are a group that made up this new conservative movement. And then there's also this moral majority. So they made up what we call a coalition. And a coalition is a group of groups that have, different kind of priorities, but they have a similar interest, which was like this overall conservative beliefs. The neocons were new conservatives because they were reacting to the liberalism of the New Deal, the Great Society, etc. So starting in the 1930s, and I know you guys cover this in period 7, but it is so super important. The federal government assumed a brand new role, right? Looking out for the welfare of its citizens, right? It kind of started that a little bit in the progressive era, but it wasn't until FDR's New Deal in response to the Great Depression that the federal government said, we are going to help people through Social Security, through welfare programs, through job programs. We're going to spend money, right? This idea of deficit spending. The government's going to spend money it doesn't have in order to stimulate the economy. And that was absolutely necessary and needed in the 1930s to deal with the Depression. But it had this fundamental change in how Americans looked at the government and what they believed the government should do for them. So, New Deal into World War II, and then the Cold War meant a fully expanded federal government. And it looked incredibly different from the laissez-faire government of the Gilded Age, right? One that kind of turned their back on the people, supported private businesses, let them use their free market capitalism, and instead they regulated the economy, right? Going back to the New Deal, thinking about the FDIC and the Glass-Steagall Act. These were all banking reform systems so that the federal government, creation of the SEC, Security Exchange Commission, could make sure that banking didn't get out of hand and lose people's money. And that's super relevant to what's going on right now with all these banking failures. LBJ expands that with the Great Society. And someone had a really excellent question in the Q&A, what's the difference between the New Deal and the Great Society? And a big difference was what they were responding to. The Great Society saw like a booming economy, and LBJ saying, how can we make that economy extend to everybody in America? And how can we uplift people out of poverty? And how can we invest in them? And the government had been investing since, the 30s, in the 50s with the GI Bill, like really, looking out for its people. So that's a lot of background and good review to get us to the neocons who do not believe in any of that stuff. They are a backlash to the liberalism of the New Deal and the Great Society. They believe in limited government. So if we were, again, to review and go back to the beginning of the country with the Constitution, they would be the anti-federalists, right? They believe that the federal government is too big, it's become too large, and it needs to be shrunk down to size. That's going to be one of the big kind of pieces of Reagan's revolution, is shrinking the federal government back down. So not only do they believe in limited government, this goes along with it, right? That's kind of the political part. But the economic part is that they believe in free market capitalism. And they do not believe that government should be involved in any type of regulation of businesses. The government had been regulating a lot, not just banking, right? Think about the EPA and all the environmental legislation that had passed throughout the 70s. this was the government stepping in and telling, businesses they can't pollute, that they need to cut down on their emissions, etc. Neocons say, no, that stifles business. What we need is a limited federal government. Their only purpose is, and this is the one thing they do believe in, is a strong defense. And they really wanted to recommit to winning the Cold War, abandon that kind of detente policy of the 70s and go back to being super hard on communism. I'm going to post in a little bit some documents from a DBQ, and you'll be able to see some of these neocons and their beliefs in limited government and free market capitalism. What is détente? That's a great question. Détente was a policy in the 1970s that was an easing of Cold War tensions. So after kind of the heightened Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War, the 70s with Vietnamization, which was pulling back American troops, Nixon actually led this détente policy, which was to kind of ease tensions with Soviet Union, come down with the arms race, like those strategic arms limitation talks we talked about before. So Reagan's like, no, we're going to abandon that détente and we're going to go back and we're going to be super hard on the Soviet Union. We're going to win the Cold War. So the neocons are one political group that really start talking about this in the 1960s, but they are continuing to gain more and more traction because of the mess that was the 1970s. Someone was asking about the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers was a cache of documents that was leaked to the Washington Post that showed LBJ knew that the Vietnam War was unwinnable, but he continued to tell people that we were doing great. We just have to send a few more troops and we're going to win it. This led to what they called a credibility gap between what the government says and what's true. You also have Nixon's scandal of Watergate. Gerald Ford, who took over from Nixon when he resigns, he pardons Nixon for all crimes he could have committed. And so Americans' trust in the government is at an all-time low, right? So neocons really capitalize on that and push for, like, everybody hates the government right now. We don't need a big government. We need to shrink that government down. Reagan's kind of famous phrase is, the government isn't the solution, the government's the problem. So this coalition of neocons comes together with this moral majority. And so a lot of you guys got this question right about the new right. These are religious, a group of religious people, mostly evangelical Christians, who were responding to the social changes of the 1960s and 70s. And so, again, we touched upon the baby boom generation. In the 1960s, they're teenagers, they're turning their 20s in the 1970s, and they are experiencing this counterculture, the sexual revolution, the contraception pill comes out in the 1960s, so women are able to control their reproduction a little bit more easily, more kind of in their hands with the pill, and people were becoming just more open about sex. And this Christian movement felt like the America that they saw was slipping away in front of their eyes. There was also a backlash to civil rights, right? African Americans now are being integrated into schools. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is banning discrimination and banning segregation in all kind of areas throughout the South and the North as well. And again, these kind of white evangelicals are feeling like everything's changing too fast, right? It's going against what they believe. And this connection to the neocons is this belief that the federal government is stepping in and saying, you need to integrate. You can't have separate facilities, right? all of that is coming from the federal government and taking that power away from the state government. So we have a converging interest here. What else? So backlash to the civil rights, backlash to women's rights, and this kind of fear that the America they know is slipping away from them. And we should just be pretty clear about it. The America they know is like a white, Christian, heterosexual America based on the nuclear family, that kind of belief of that like American dream with, you know, the white picket fence, all of those ideas are changing. With the women's rights movement, divorce rates are going up. Women are escaping unhappy marriages. Women finally get the right to have credit cards in their names. There's a lot of legislation that's breaking down some of the gender discrimination throughout laws, state laws and federal. And these evangelicals just feel like they've lost who they are, that America is just changing too quickly. So let me just take a look at the chat. Is everybody with me? Nativism is an interesting connection. I think another important piece, someone had mentioned it in the chat before, I don't think we had it on the Great Society slide, but there's also the Immigration Act of 1965 that's passed under LBJ, and this led to increasing numbers of immigrants coming from South America and Asia. And this repealed the quotas of the 1920s that you guys talked about yesterday. So yeah, America itself is changing, the way it looks, the way it acts. And evangelicals were really fearful of that. So they come together with the neocons to create a conservative coalition and to elect Ronald Reagan into power. One other kind of little piece I just want to touch upon is that this didn't happen overnight. This wasn't like 1979. Everybody came together to basically put the Reagan in a landslide. This had been happening for a long time. We can trace some of this back to 1968 when Nixon was running for president, and he employed what's called the Southern Strategy. And so I know this is when a lot of students get confused with the political parties. And that's because this is an inflection point. This is a change of what Democrats and Republicans believe in. They're flipping at this time. So Democrats, since Andrew Jackson and the 1820s, had been the states' rights proponents. And the South was always known as being solidly Democrat throughout the Civil War, throughout Reconstruction. Things start to change in the 1930s when Northern Democrats under FDR begin believing in more expanded federal government. So that's kind of the shift for Democrats. And then the shift for Republicans happens around these ideas when civil rights becomes a Democratic priority under LBJ. And Southern Democrats are like, this Democratic Party, this doesn't match our beliefs. And what's his name? Richard Nixon takes this feeling and he capitalizes on it. He starts to pull Democrats away from the Democratic Party into the Republican Party based on these like pretty racist ideas that he uses this coded language. And I think I saw someone say it before, it just like quickly flew by in the chat, but the ideas of law and order, this kind of veiled language, sometimes called dog whistle. It's like, it's not overtly racist, but if you know, then you know. So all of it is like brimming throughout the 60s and 70s to put Ronald Reagan into power in 1980. He wins by a landslide, wins from Jimmy Carter. Someone before asked, you need to know Jimmy Carter. something could come up about him with the Iranian hostage crisis, or potentially about like environmentalism. He supported that, but ultimately he was only one-term president because he was so unpopular. The economy was doing really bad back in the 70s, in the end of the 70s. And so Reagan comes in and says, I'm going to fix everything. And we're going to go back to laissez-faire economics. What he doesn't call it that. He calls it, or other people call it Reaganomics. And this is an idea of trickle-down economics. So now moving on to this 1980s part. Reaganomics was kind of the culmination of the neocons. So tax cuts for the wealthy, and the belief that they kind of supported or justified this idea by saying, if we give tax cuts to wealthy people and corporations, then they're going to build out their businesses, right? They don't have that burden of taxation. And then they're going to create more jobs, and that's going to trickle down to the American people, who then will have better jobs and then have more money to spend. This should sound familiar because it's exactly the Republican stance today. A lot of research has shown that this doesn't work. Instead, corporations and wealthy people hoard that money, and it does not trickle down. But it did result in kind of a saving of the mess of the economy from the 70s. There was a technology boom in the 1980s, and in the short term, there was economic growth. There was also a crash in 1987. So what we see with a lot of Republican policies are booms and crash, boom and bust. And that happens pretty, like, it's definitely going to happen. You don't need to know anything about Trump or Biden. I'm 99.9% sure it's not going to get to that. 1980s at home is Reagan also increases the war on drugs. There is a crack epidemic, and this fear of drugs, it becomes Nancy Reagan, his wife, a prime part of her campaign, the Just Say No campaign, and ultimately leads to really racist policies that disproportionately affect African Americans, where they have what's called a minimum mandatory sentencing. So you have these really long prison sentences for small amounts of drugs. And the reason why it was super racist is cocaine, which was a more expensive drug and was used by more white people. You could have you'd have to have a pound of cocaine to get the same amount of prison time as someone who had a gram of crack. I don't have the exact things, but you could look it up. It's leads to mass incarceration, which we're still dealing with today, still facing, even though there's been a little bit around some prison reform recently. You also have the AIDS epidemic, which begins in the 1980s. Originally, nothing was known about it. It was called GRID, a gay-related immune disorder. And there was this belief that it just affected gay men. And so Reagan, who was really beholden to these religious groups, he refused to even acknowledge it. He was just completely silent on it. Tens of thousands of people died before he said, okay, this is something we need to look into, we need to address. And these were Americans who were dying. And it wasn't until it began to spread to heterosexual people, to women, through intravenous drug use and unprotected sex, that people began to speak up on it, and they started to develop, research into developing treatments for it. On the right side here, we have some foreign policy. So part of the neocons' belief was going super hard on communism. Reagan is I'm going to do that. I'm going to end the Cold War. He pumps money into defense. So during the Reagan administration, even though, it's like limited government, they spent so much money on this strategic defense initiative. It was jokingly called Star Wars because the idea was we're going to put like a laser on the moon and it's going to like create a force field around America and the Soviets won't be able to bomb us. It was science fiction and it wasn't, obviously not able to be created. And so it was a huge waste of money. But I would say a little caveat to that was it did scare the Soviet Union. It could have led to more of the arms race, but the Soviet Union at this point was beginning to fall apart and they couldn't keep up. And so this idea of the SDI scared them. There's a Reagan-Gorbachev summit where they're starting to talk about kind of ending the Cold War, how it's going to end. Reagan goes to Germany and gives this amazing speech where he says, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And then 1 or 2 years later, the Berlin Wall does come down, which is seen as the symbolic end to the Cold War. And then in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolves, and that's the total end of it. The Soviet Union no longer exists, and I guess you would say America won that war. That happens officially under George Bush. It is 9:30, so Zoe, let's hit the next slide. I'm going to go through this super quickly because you don't need to know this stuff for the exam, but in case it comes up, these are the presidents after Reagan. So Bush 1 hit the father. Soviet Union dissolves under his time. He was actually pretty well known for his foreign policy, but then he leads the country into the first Iraq War, which was to pull Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. American Disabilities Act passes, the ADA, super important legislation to recognizing people with disabilities and providing access for them, especially in education. That's one of my passions. Then he loses the election, so he only serves 1 term, and Bill Clinton wins. He was a Democratic governor from Arkansas. Oh, sorry, go back. He was, there we go. Democratic president from Arkansas. He was the governor, but even though he was a Democrat, he was more centrist, and he followed through with some like Reagan beliefs like welfare reform. That's still not enough to get the Republicans to like him. They impeach him for his affair with Monica Lewinsky and lying about it. And that's kind of a stain on his presidency towards the end, even though he does some deficit reductions, passes a bill which gets rid of the deficit. We actually have a surplus, which like the government hadn't had in so long, decades. But that all goes away, that deficit, or the surplus rather, goes away. We go back into deficit under George W. Bush, which was Bush 2, who wins in 2000. And then after he gets elected, he pushes through some tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy, although I think some tax cuts for the middle class as well. And so then that surplus is completely gone. We're back into a deficit. And now we're in like trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. September 11th, obviously, a super important, pivotal moment in American history. Our first attack on our soil since Pearl Harbor leads to the war in Iraq, second war in Iraq, and the war in Afghanistan. Really difficult, unwinnable wars. The Patriot Act, I saw that recently come up, and that was another example of the government infringing on people's civil liberties. That is something that could pop up in an answer choice. I haven't seen anything about the 2008 economic crash that happens in September of 2008. That was right when I graduated from college. Massive recession. It's called the Great Recession. And Bush passes what's called TARP, where they bailed out all the banks. And Obama then wins election in November and makes history as the first Black president. And he has to deal with the terrible economy. He regulates banks, puts in some things in place to prevent some type of crisis, which had been repealed under Trump, and now we're dealing with some of that stuff, those issues again. Repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, marriage equality passes in 2015 with the Supreme Court decision, and the Affordable Care Act, healthcare reform, finally, a very difficult process that goes through. Okay, I know that was quick, but you really don't need that much, and hopefully you know some of that because it happened while you guys were alive. Let's talk about the DBQ and how you might see some of this information come up. So DBQ is 25% of your exam score. It's a big chunk. It will have one required question. It's part 2 of the exam. So you'll do multiple choice, short answer, take a short break, and then you'll come back and you'll do the 2 essays back to back. You have an hour and 40 minutes to do both essays. And so that breaks down an hour for the DBQ and 40 minutes for the LEQ. We're going to talk now about what to do for that 15-minute reading period. And I apologize to all my students who are with us because we're going over what we did in class last week. But you guys could definitely help out in the chat because we did talk about this and we looked at this DBQ together. So you will see on the DBQ 7 documents, and you have to use 6 of them to get full points. So Zoe, can you go to the rubric, next slide? Very similar to the LEQ rubric, the DBQ has like a lot of the same ideas, but really specific points for evidence. So you guys can write a beautiful essay, right? Like you guys would all kill this if we could do it at home and write it and take our time. We don't have time for this. So what we have to do is just kind of tick these boxes that I'm going to go over and just write an essay that gets you these points. Really think about it as this like draft of an essay. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be polished. It just needs to do these things. So same as the LEQ, you need to have a thesis. You can't have an essay without a thesis. It is your argument. It will respond to the prompt, and it will, yeah, Louise, we are going to do the conservatism one. Needs to respond to the prompt, and it needs to establish a line of reasoning, which means it needs to set up your argument. Someone asked before about a 3-pronged thesis. You can do that, but you don't have to. You can get all of these points with 2 reasons. And that might be easier for you to do. Just have kind of your introduction and 2 body paragraphs. You can get all of your points with this. Don't worry about the complexity point. I'm not even going to talk about it. If you get a DBQ or an LEQ that's like in your wheelhouse, like you know everything about the topic, then you can write a complex essay. Otherwise, don't worry about it. So after the thesis point is the contextualization. This is where you're going to describe, basically set the scene for your essay. So a good rule of thumb is like 20 years before the time specified in the prompt. So the prompt's always going to give you years. All of your evidence needs to come from those years, but your contextualization should come from before. So my suggestion is in your introduction to start with the contextualization. Set the scene for us, right? Kind of lay the groundwork. Imagine you're here in our CRAM and we're going through chronologically, right? Whatever the time period is of the prompt, just give us a little taste of what came before. and what's relevant to the prompt, right? So if it's about social movements, like let us know what happened before to necessitate a social movement, right? So for example, if it's about civil rights movement, you can talk about Jim Crow and the effects of Reconstruction, like what led to a need for civil rights. So take us through it, the history, and then come to your last sentence of your intro, which will be your thesis. Then you're going to defend your thesis with evidence. So I'm going to break down these points for you. You get 4 points to do different things with evidence. I think, you can do a counterclaim, but you don't have to do a counterclaim. And you should do a counter if you feel comfortable with it. And I think some prompts lend themselves to counterclaims much better, but you can even get the complexity point without a counterclaim if you can explain the evidence well. So the evidence, you get 1 point for using the content from 3 documents. So that's like a bare minimum. Everyone's going to get that point. My suggestion is to use all the documents so that if you misinterpret one, you could still get that credit point even if you mess up 1 or 2. To get a second point on the evidence, you need to use 6 documents to support your argument. So that's a big leap there. But again, you're going to try to use all the documents in your essay. And so when you're using them, you're arguing kind of how that evidence from the document relates to your thesis, to your argument. You also need to use outside evidence, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then you need to source 3 of the documents. I call this the extended analysis. This is where you reference historical context, purpose, point of view, or intended audience. So you need to do 1 of those for 3 of the documents. But again, I suggest that you do it for all 6 documents. In case you misinterpret one, you have some backups. Then you get 1 point for complexity. We're not even going to talk about that. Let's take a look at a prompt. If you can go to the next slide, Zoe. Sorry, no, go back to that one. So my suggestion for you is to spend these 15 minutes that they give you to read through the documents, planning out your essay. So you need to create an outline before you look at the documents. And this may seem counterintuitive or scary, but it will help you to really think through your essay and create an argument that you can then use the documents to support rather than creating an argument based on the documents. You basically can't get that complexity point if you just do a laundry list of documents, but it's also just going to be really beneficial for you to think through, what am I arguing in this essay, and then use the documents to support your argument. Once you've outlined, and I'll show you what this looks like in just a minute, then you read through the documents, and this is the fun part because you get to see how the documents support what you've already brainstormed, and that can be really affirming as you're writing this DBQ, when you're like, oh wow, I know all of this stuff already. I already came up with this and I'm as smart as I can be. Once you've figured out how the documents support your argument, you then will have some evidence in that outline that isn't related to the documents, and then boom, you have your outside evidence. So 5 minutes of outlining and then 10 minutes of reading the documents is going to set you up for success. All right, let's take a look at a DBQ prompt from 2015. I'm going to, let me grab it, put in the chat the link to the documents. from College Board. And this is the FRQ section for all of 2015. This was the first year of the new format for the exam. So, planning tips, like I said, you can really get away with a really good essay with 2 body paragraphs. So, do a simple T-chart for your outline. If you're like desperate to do a counterclaim, just do a 3rd box. That's fine. And you don't have to do this. This is just like tips to get through, especially if you're not feeling super confident on the topic or on the DBQ in general. So you identify the historical thinking skill in the prompt, right? Is it asking me to explain the causes of? That's causation. Is it asking me to compare 2 different movements? That'll be comparison. Or is it asking me about how things changed around a certain turning point? That's continuity and change over time. So sleep deprivation is real, Sophie, and getting a good night's sleep is super important as well. It's like a huge part of how you do an exam, no matter how much you studied, is how well you slept. So you can use a piece of evidence in a counterclaim, absolutely. In this case, the prompt that we're going to look at is causation. So we're going to do cause 1 and cause 2. It's a little weird. It's not a cause and effect question, but it's asking you to explain the causes of, that's plural. Do you need 2 causes? So next slide will give us the prompt. Explain the reasons why a new conservatism rose to prominence in the United States between 1960 and 1989. So first of all, identify the time period, 1960 to 1989. So you're kind of thinking in your head, mid 20th century, maybe you're filing through your notes, period 8. Oh, that's what they did on Wednesday. Totally got this. And then you figure out historical thinking skill, explain the reasons why, reason 1, reason 2, cause 1, cause 2, same thing. Spend 5 minutes brainstorming just bullet points, like really brief notes of everything you can remember about this topic. Even if it's not super organized yet, the more you kind of jot down, the more your argument will come alive, will appear, kind of how you're going to break down the essay. So hit the next slide and you'll see an example. We talked about this conservative coalition before, the Neocons and the evangelicals, right? The evangelicals, a group within that was called the moral majority. So in my essay, I would talk about these 2 ideas. When we did this in my class last week, a lot of people broke it down for like economic reasons and social reasons. And that's also totally fine. You're going to have really similar ideas here. The neocons had those economic beliefs, right, and political beliefs, and the moral majority was more interested in like changing social mores. So it's the same idea, but also know like you could have a different argument as someone else, and you guys could both get really good scores. All right, so once you've outlined, right, really quickly, buzzwords is like the best way I can describe it. You're then going to start reading through the documents. So I posted the documents in the chat. I'm going to post them one more time so you can practice this yourself. But Zoe, can you hit the next slide? And here you're going to see as you move through the documents and read them, right? You read through document 1. It's Barry Goldwater. He was a Republican, ran for president. He was neocon, right? Like he believes in limited government. He's a states' rights guy. And so that fits into my outline in this reaction to the New Deal and the Great Society. I think he talks about the New Deal in his piece. So when you're using that in your argument, you're going to reference Barry Goldwater in document 1. Document 2, Milton Friedman. He's an economist, and he's, again, talking about laissez-faire economics, this idea of free market capitalism. So same idea, right? Like you can also use document 2 at that point. So that's what I mean by slotting in the documents. You're putting it into your outline where it makes the most sense. And now, at the end of 5 minutes, you should have the outline for your essay, what you're going to talk about in each body paragraph, and you should have like a good thesis based on like all of these ideas, right? So a possible thesis would be conservatism rose because of two groups, the neoconservatives and the moral majority, who rejected the status quo and appealed to traditional American values to take over the government under Reagan, right? So this kind of gives us our two causes, these two big groups, the coalition. Possible contextualization you see above is taking us how we get there, right? Like, how did we arrive at this coalition? Well, we had the New Deal and the Great Society, and we had all of this government intervention, and this is the reaction to it. Okay, that was a lot. We've got about 12 minutes left. Go to the next slide. I think it's our Q&A. Yeah. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have now about anything in history. Girls in the wing, if you want to send any questions to the screen, totally do that. And then also, if you have any like lingering questions, like big ideas, how do we write a DBQ without laundry lists in the documents? I will tell you that in 1 second. If you have any like big things you want us to talk about tomorrow, a lot of you guys are saying, what are we going to go over? Like, you tell us what you want to go over and we will do that tomorrow. We've got 3 hours and we want it to be super meaningful for you. So let us know in the chat and in the Q&A so we can plan for you guys for tomorrow. Okay. Explain the OPEC oil crisis. I'll do that one really quickly. That was in the 1970s, and OPEC was the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So it was a group of countries that had oil, or oil rich, they call them, in the Middle East. And they embargoed the United States. So they did not sell oil to the United States as punishment for the United States supporting Israel in the Arab-Israeli War in 1973. This led to a crisis in the United States because there's a huge reliance on oil. This hasn't really changed today. We saw something very similar happen with the war in Ukraine and like the issues around like boycotting Russia. And even though I think they have a little bit more natural gas, but in the United States, this led to like oil shock. There was no oil, there was no gas, there was a shortage, and people needed cars to get everywhere. There was also high unemployment at the time, so there was like this fear if you couldn't get to your job, you would lose your job and couldn't get another one. They had to ration oil, so like you could only go on certain days of the week or based on your like license plate number, and so it led to mistrust in the government, right? This belief that like they couldn't deal with that. Lots of other questions. All right, so give me that question before about how do you do the DBQ without the laundry list, right? So the laundry list is when like you really just go through in your body paragraphs and say, in document 1, Barry Goldwater said this, and that meant that he was against federal power. And in document 2, Milton Friedman said this, right? Like that's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's not related to your argument. It's just like, this is what the documents say. So doing that outline before is really going to help you, right? To not just like go through the documents. And another piece I didn't mention, but a lot of students I've seen, like once they read the documents, they forget everything else that they do know, that they really have like retained, but then you read the documents and it's like, oh wait, I forgot everything else, right? So doing the outline first will help you to structure an argument, and then you use the documents to support that argument. So you are trying to connect or compare them to each other. You want to connect them to your argument And you can compare them if, let's say, they present like a opposing or like a different view on something, but that should be part of your argument. So that's the way to like get around just listing off the documents. Oh my gosh, so much in the chat. Any other questions you guys want to send to me? I feel like I missed a lot. How do we support our argument with our documents? So like first you want to summarize the content of the document. So, right, like kind of explain what it is. You can say like Barry Goldwater wrote in his book, or a woman wrote in a letter to her governor, and then explain like what's the main idea of that document. Then you can write why that document was written. That's going to help you with that sourcing point. Was it written to appeal to like a broad swath of people? If it's a politician, probably. Was it written like as a private letter, like that letter to Rockefeller? Or like what was she wanting the governor to do to respond to her kind of problems? And then you connect it to your prompt, right? So in that case, the prompt was this led to this coalition that elected Reagan, right? So then talk about why they were conservative, like why they were pushing forth their beliefs, whether it was economic or social. There are notes from today. You can get that in the CRAM hub. Can you go over the connections between neocons, new right, and moral majority? So the neocons were specific in that they believed in free market capitalism, like limited government. They want like a definitely decrease in government, like welfare programs, but also like no regulation of businesses. And that goes back to that free market capitalism, laissez-faire. They're all kind of the same thing. The new right and the moral majority are the same. The new right, I think, refers to like the broad idea of this group of evangelicals who had these conservative beliefs. And the moral majority was the name of a specific group. I think that was led by Jerry Falwell. They called themselves the moral majority because they felt like they were a majority of people. Maybe at that time they were, but definitely not anymore. Can you go over the presidents of period 8 and 9? Someone had a great question earlier about like the presidents of the 20th century. Would that be helpful for us to go over tomorrow if we do like a kind of list through them? Yeah, okay. I think that's a great thing for us to do tomorrow. We'll go over the presidents, their political parties, and just like if you really need to know them, because for example, you don't need to know much about like Warren G. Harding, except he did write some pretty racy love letters. Yeah, you know what? We'll do it for all the presidents. We'll just like hit the big ones, and that'll be a good way for you guys to contextualize them throughout the timeline. I know we're not going to do everyone from the 1800s, but we're going to do the important ones. Can we review a template of making an LEQ and a DBQ? Yeah, we could do that. How in depth do we need to get into battles and presidents? Not at all. You don't need to know battles. If you want to study them, like I think it's helpful to know a turning point battle, right? Like the Battle of Saratoga was a turning point because the French got involved, but like that's it. That's all you need to know about it. And it's sometimes helpful to know like the end battle, and that's again like the end, and that's how America won, Battle of Yorktown. But you don't need to know military history for the APUSH test at all. And I forget what else you asked. Presidents. I believe there's like 6 presidents whose names could come up, but it's good to know them just to know like as U.S. history changed, if you know the presidents that led to those changes, just going to help you to remember the timeline. we just did a timeline basically, but we actually created some timelines. Maybe we could just throw that in the night 5 slides for you. And that way you guys will have it. Any other questions that you guys want to see tomorrow? You guys have been great. I feel like we have a good plan for tomorrow now. Sasha, are you asking me if you can study in lunch tomorrow? We are going to do court cases. We already had that on the docket for you guys, so we'll do that. Oh. Sasha, you guys can come to my room to study if you want. We could have a study sesh. Yeah, court cases we're going to do. We'll go over them chronologically, but also what is important to know about them, why they're significant. Market revolution and industrialization. What about it? Like, what's the difference? Ruthie, I wish I could be for everyone. Market revolution is a precursor to the Industrial Revolution. So it really sets the stage for industrialization, but it really changes how goods are sold in America. And then industrialization is like how they're produced, but one leads to the other. I think, Christina, when we hit on the presidents, we'll touch upon political parties and like their main belief, which I think the best way to remember that is Federalist or anti-Federalist. So we're going to do presidents, court cases, LEQ, DBQ. It's 10 o'clock, and I fully support everybody getting a good night's sleep the next 2 nights. That's going to help all of this just process into your brain, and then it's just going to all come bubbling up on Friday, and you guys are going to kill it. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you guys all back here tomorrow. Night.